Hi there. This is lesson 11 about zines, and I want to just give you a few quick thoughts about what zines are, what they're made of, what's in them, and what you're going to do to make your zine this week for the zine project. Okay, so if you have read Stephen Duncombe's chapter from Notes on Underground and browsed the zines I've linked to on the website and taken the raw quiz on Duncombe, then you're ready to start this lesson. And so I'm not going to go over what zines are. Duncombe says that pretty well in his chapter, and I will see on your quiz how close you got to understanding what they basically are. So I'm not going to go over that, but I want to show you what they look like and point some things out about them that will help you start to think about what you want to do in your zine. So here's a zine that I bought in Seattle over the Christmas break when I was there. Brain Scan issue number 19. It's a little booklet. It's a smaller size format zine, and you can see it's just a black and white Xeroxed miniature magazine, and it's staple bound. I don't know if you can make that out, but there's staples holding it together, and it's pretty nicely printed and cut, but it's pretty basic, and that's what zines are. I could bring out more examples of zines, but I think you should get the idea pretty quickly. They're very basic, small, homemade objects. One thing to notice is how messy, or I might even say grungy they look, as in their format. They're just kind of ugly or intentionally messy. Sometimes in zines you'll see images and text overlapping with each other, or touching, or sort of like not straight on the page. Lots of different, sort of busy looking. The black and white Xeroxed nature of zines often makes them look fairly gritty in the sort of texture of their appearance. The images kind of come out as pretty washed out or high contrast. If you look at the cover of Brain Scan, you'll see maybe just how sort of rough and textured these images come out, what the words look like, the fonts and text. Okay, so you get the idea. You'll even see in a lot of the zines that you browse that a lot of the times texts are handwritten or written in in a variety of different with a variety of different writing tools like markers or pens or colored pencils, stamps. You really can use any print item tools you want when you make zines, and you see that reflected in the kind of look that you get, the final result. And I think Duncombe gives a strong indication of this. I think that is kind of the endearing, nice, fun thing about zines. It's one of the attractive things about zines, is that they can be kind of messy, they can be kind of edgy in the way they look, and that's something I think that zine makers liked when they were doing zines in the late 20th century and still today. Now, let's just think about for a second why they look this way. What did they intentionally try? Nowadays you might, but is there a reason why they look this way? And I think there is an important reason, and that is technology. So if you've ever used a Xerox copier or a print copy machine in an office, you know that when you're making black and white copies, there are certain settings that you can adjust to get different kinds of results. That accounts for part of it. The way that paper looks when it's printed out on copy machines is part of the reason for this look. And the other reason is because zines were emerging in an era just before word processing was a comprehensive design platform. Just before. So you might see in zines that instead of a typewriter, perhaps you're using a word processor like Microsoft Word to set your text. But then that text is typically printed out, cut out, and taped or assembled, glued into a zine manuscript that's then copied. So in other words, these zines are traditionally, a classical zine is made by hand on paper, not on a computer, or only components are made on a computer, but it's ultimately assembled by hand. That is a very imperfect and imprecise science. A sort of crafty look with a lot of imperfections is then emerging in the looks of these zines. Okay, so let's talk now about what the writing inside of zines are like. And I'm going to just ask a question or two about this and let you guys try to articulate what's going on with the style of zine writing, or the tone that zine writing typically takes, or the kind of form or conventions that zine writing typically exhibits in today's discussion thread for the lesson activity. I'm going to let you guys talk about that and try to identify some tone patterns, some style patterns, because looking at several zines, I think you'll start to see there's a specific feeling to the way that these zine articles or different writing that's in them, the way they're written. It's not a conventional, it's certainly not a very formal or academic form of writing. One particular piece of writing in zines that I want to call your attention to real quick is the intro statements. If you look at some of those zines that you browse today, you'll see that almost all of them have a kind of introduction statement, or you might call it manifesto of sorts, at the beginning of the zine. And I want to look quickly at what is going on in those intro statements. So here's a quote from the intro statement to Social Detox #1. Introduction. It's been incredible to create this zine. This project has created the space in my life to focus on gender liberation and collaborate with amazing people in the process. Thanks to my friends who've supported this project and to the honest criticism I've gotten as well. This wouldn't exist if it weren't for the love and support of my comrades. Fire up. All right, and now I'm going to just jump for a point of comparison to Antipathy's introduction page, the very first page you see when you open the cover of Antipathy, the Antipathy zine that I ask you to browse. I'm just going to skip down to the last paragraph of that manifesto, that introduction statement. Okay, as always, I say lots of insightful shit within these pages, and am an avid fan of intelligent discourse and thoughtful debate. If something I said in these pages pissed you off, struck you as erroneous, or made you happy, let me know. I've said it once before and I'll keep saying it until I'm blue in the face. Discussion and making friends are far more revolutionary than selling 10,000 socialist worker papers, picking up a gun, or bombing a federal building. So write, damn it. I promise to write back. Love, safe, and love a lot. All right, so what do we see? There's more examples you'll be able to browse through in that list of zines. But you'll see, I think, the pattern here. Notice how personal this writing is. It's all about the zine maker's life, or this part of his life where he or she is creating or writing about this stuff. It's not ashamed or shy about talking about its direct relevance to the zine maker, its significance to him or her, and also it's just as much about the zine making process as it is about the final product. In other words, these intro statements often say what's in the zine or what the zine is about, what the purpose of the zine was, but it also often contains some language about how the zine was assembled, or sort of something the zine maker was thinking about when he or she was writing it, what was going on while it was being created. And that kind of is appropriate for zine making, for the zine community, because zine makers believe one thing that unifies this very diverse genre of writing and art and print practice. One thing that unifies it is they all believe in the power, the magic, I guess, of making something, and they're more interested in the sort of messy process of making things than, I think, the final perfect product of what it ends up being. So I kind of see that as a nice tie-in to what zine makers care about, kind of like their values. They like to talk about making as a process. And also, look at how impassioned these intro statements are. They're about whatever it is the writer believes in. The whole zine is about something the writer believes in, but the intro statement really kind of puts a point on that, or the cause, or the ideals, the activism. There's a kind of an edgy activist slant to these zines as a whole, and it comes out really concretely and directly in these intro statements. So I think you'll see that that's a kind of the tone or pattern emerging in those intro statements. I bring this up because you're going to write an intro statement to your zine when you assemble your zine this week. Okay, so now I want to just briefly kind of go over what you're doing for the zine assignment this week when you make your zine. Everybody in the class is going to make their own solo one-person zine using the stuff that you wrote for this class. It should probably be about 10 to 20 pages. The exact number doesn't matter, although you'll see there's certain format limitations that will help you decide exactly how many pages you want. And your zine will include the following texts or items. First, it should contain a remediated version of your first-person essay. I'll explain what remediated means in a second. Second, it should contain your plagiarism project, images and text. You can just copy it or tweak it so that it fits nicely into your zine. It should contain, thirdly, a remediated version of your critical essay, which you just finished. Fourth, you should write an introductory statement or manifesto, like I was just describing a few minutes ago. And last, you should add at least one or more items, additional supplementary items that you create yourself or select yourself, something like a work of art, a sketch. Maybe you can draw a comic. Maybe you can create a crossword puzzle. Maybe you can assemble a bunch of quotes that you find meaningful and interesting. What you put in your zine is completely up to you. Of course, going beyond these basic requirements, it's very flexible, and it's intentionally flexible for you to create a zine that you like, how these texts come together. What do I mean by remediating your two essays going into this zine? That's just a fancy word to say you are reformatting or rearranging and or editing the essay. You're giving it a new format to make it appropriate and effective in this new medium. In this case, the new medium is zines. In other words, you created this essay as an academic essay, but now it's going to live as a zine article. And that probably should feel and look a little different than it would for an academic essay. So there's a couple things you can do to these your essays to make them, to remediate them in an interesting way. I would imagine that many of you would want to abridge your articles, your essays in some way. You may want lots of text in your zine, but some people don't like lots of text in their zines, and they want it to look more image heavy. And so you want to reduce the number of words, and you might want to get rid of some of parts of your essays that you don't really think are essential to what you want to do. You might want to rewrite a couple parts of your essays in a different tone to get a more appropriate zine-like style. You certainly should think about how you want to illustrate your essays through artwork that you find and want to assemble, put in your zine, or ways of illustrating it that you can come up with yourself. And finally, you can always add to your essay if you want to, if you know now, or if you realize, wow, I could tell a short story, anecdote that would really illustrate something and give it a really personal zine-like feel to it. That would work too. So that's basically it. Take some of the same paragraphs and language and words, but recreate the essay so that it works as a piece of a zine writing. Okay. Now, that's the writing for your zine. What about the design and art elements of your zine? The art side of zines is really neat, and zine makers or zinesters often make their own art. They're typically pretty crafty people, and they have some art creating abilities, but they also often plagiarize, and I use that word in the same way we used it for the plagiarism assignment. They take images and different pieces of print, different items from print culture, magazines they have laying around, advertisements, cereal boxes, whatever they have. Zinesters are famous for throwing that stuff into their zine and giving it that special zine look that's very crafty and imperfect and messy. So you are allowed and encouraged to take other people's art and put them in zines. And that's the way zines work. And it's an interesting supplemental aspect of what we were discussing when we read Jonathan Lethem about the gift economy and about copyright laws. Zine makers have traditionally been on the fringe of print culture, and they're allowed, it's a way for them to push back against the kind of copyright culture that Lethem was saying has a lot of flaws in it. And one way they do that is by reappropriating different parts of print culture, other things they take out of magazines and so on. So play around with different images you find, different images you make yourself. Maybe you're a photographer, maybe you're a drawer. Notice too that collage-like styles are often very common in zines, which is to say you take a little snippet from a magazine, you overlay it with a snippet from something else, and you've created something new, a work of collage art. You're just not just taking whole pages out of magazines, you're slicing up those magazines and making a new collage out of them. And that actually has more copyright protection than it would if you just were taking whole chunks of print things and putting them in. However you choose to do it, play with it, have fun. It's up to you what you want to do. And you will get some ideas for some techniques you can use by looking at tomorrow's reading, What You Mean, What's a Zine. You can go ahead and look at that today. I'm not really sure why I assigned it for tomorrow, but you can already start to think about what you want to do in your zine if you want to scan through that reading. And you'll see illustrations, how do you assemble, how do you get these different effects on copy machines and so on. Okay, so here's what I would do if I was making a zine for the first time, because it's a very easy beginner, starter, entry-level way of doing it. That's just to take regular 8x11 pieces of computer paper, a couple pieces of paper, fold them over in half. Don't staple or bind them in any way. You want to keep them unbound. And now you've got a basic manuscript with which to work. At this point, you can just start creating your zine. Start printing things out, cutting things out of magazines, drawing on this. You've got a cover page. You've got the inside cover page where you might put your introduction statement. Print that out off the piece off your computer and assemble that with cut it out with scissors and tape it on if you're doing it the traditional way like that. And you just work with this master copy manuscript. Everything goes on to this. Now, it's still unbound. So when it's done and ready to go, you can then take these pieces of paper apart with all the stuff taped to it, go to your local copy machine, the library, or FedEx or somewhere, and you can make copies front and back of each of the master sheets of the master manuscript. Then, when they come out of the copy machine, you can collate them nice black and white, back and front and back, and they can be stapled. So that's my suggestion for how to go about making your zine. Go through the process in your head real quick because before you get started, because it's easy to sort of screw it up the first time. And if you just think through common sense, how am I going to get this final product of a booklet format? You'll save yourself maybe a little headache. So once you've finished making your zine, you then at this point, for the purposes of this class, all you need to do is make the zine and scan the zine into a PDF and upload it. If you were making this zine for actual distribution and print form, you would actually make copies at a copy machine into black and white and staple or bind them in some way and distribute them to your friends or whatever. If you want to do that for your own pleasure, then before you assemble and scan your zine, go ahead and make printed copies. But if you don't want to do that, then you can go ahead and staple your half-fold zine, staple along the edge, and then you need to scan your zine. So I would take the assembled zine and scan cover, open up pages 2 and 3, scan, turn the page, and scan just like you would a chapter out of a textbook or a book that you want to archive for yourself. After you've copied all, or you scanned all of the open-faced pages of the zine, you're good to go. You just need to make sure they're all, face up, or I should say, like right side up in the scan, and all the no pages are missing, and save it as a PDF and upload it. So that's how I would do it. So let's just talk very, very briefly then about how you're gonna about making a plan. You're going to need, thinking through this, you're going to need some supplies to make this zine. You're going to need the paper. You're going to need scissors, a way of printing out text, unless you want to write out your essay text. People handwrite their zines all the time, but that would require pencils or pens or markers. So any of those items you need. Whatever you want to use in addition to those basic items, you're also allowed to use stencils, stamps, paint, markers. It really is completely creatively open and up to you. So whatever items you want to use to make your zine, think about where you're going to acquire them. Start working on that today or tomorrow, because you're going to start making your zine tomorrow and finish it on Thursday. And think about where and how you're going to scan the finished zine on Thursday, so that you aren't rushing around at the last minute. If you're on campus, of course, you can go to the library. If you're back home, maybe where you live, there's a scanner available, or you might have to make a little trip to the local copy store. So just think and do a little planning ahead for that. Okay, that's it. I'm going to set you guys free to discuss some of the interesting stuff you see in the zines we browsed today, and to discuss some of the stuff that Duncan was talking about in today's activity. And then you're free to start creating your zine. Have fun with it, and send me questions if something doesn't make sense to you. I totally want to warn you, and that you should expect that this will be a kind of trial and error, messy process. Unless you're really good at thinking through logistics ahead of time, it's almost inevitable that you'll run into some weird obstacle or quirk as you assemble, or get a kind of different result than you were expecting. And that's kind of fun too. It's kind of some of the ways that zines work as sort of magical items that are not perfect, that show mistakes or unexpected turns in the process of making them. And that, last but not least, when you submit your zine, you'll see on the assignment page, I'm asking you to reflect briefly on how it went when you were making it. And that's partly what I'm asking about, is what did you run into that was weird or unexpected, or how did you work around an unforeseen obstacle? Because those little parts of the process of making zines add to the aesthetic and the the magic, I guess, of what they end up looking like and what they mean. Okay, thank you. Have a great time discussing and making your zines this week, and I will see you guys at the Zine Show and Tell on the last day of class. Bye.